You're lying on your back, sand in your teeth. The sun's burning your skin. Someone nearby is crying. Someone else is praying. And towering over you, 5 meters high, is a mountain of ash. It's not a volcano. It's the altar of Zeus. Every layer is the ash of hundreds of bulls burned over centuries. And right now, another one's being added. You can smell blood, smoke, and the oil they rubbed all over your body before the race. You lost. There's no silver medal. Second place doesn't exist. You just failed. 10 steps away stands the winner. They're crowning him with an olive branch cut by a sacred knife from a tree said to have been planted by Heracles himself. He's a hero. They'll erect a statue in his honor. His hometown will be freed from taxes. And you? No one will remember you. Welcome to Olympia, 7th century BCE, a place where sport isn't entertainment, it's sacrifice, where spectators sleep in the mud, drink river water, and put up with the stink of makeshift toilets hidden in the pine forest, where athletes compete naked, slicked in oil so the gods can see every muscle, where if you bribe a judge, they'll whip you in public and carve your name onto a bronze statue of shame forever. This isn't what you see on TV. This is the truth. Today, we won't talk about medals, records, or opening ceremonies. We're going behind the scenes. We'll find out why people walked for weeks just to get here, why they endured heat, lice, and dysentery, just to watch someone hurl a discus or break their opponent's fingers in pancration. Because the Olympic Games were never just about sport. They were about faith, about honor, about war disguised as competition, about women who ran in chitons with bare chests, their names erased from history, about slaves forced to run alongside wealthy men while their masters took all the glory, about emperors who postponed the games by 2 years just so they could win, about terrorists storming the Olympic Village, yet the games went on anyway. We'll trace the journey from Coroebus, a possible humble cook who became the first Olympic champion in 776 BCE, to Spyridon Louis, a water carrier who revived the marathon in 1896 and was rewarded with lifetime free shaves. We'll witness how the games died in 392 CE, not from decline, but by imperial decree banning paganism, how they vanished for 1,000 years, until a British archaeologist uncovered their ruins in a swamp, and how Pierre de Coubertin dreamed of peace, but got politics, commerce, and scandals instead. This isn't a story about winners. It's a story about those who believed that through movement you could reach the gods, or each other. So if you're ready, let's step into that dust, because right there, among flies, sweat, and sacred ash, an idea was born, one that outlived empires, and it's still alive today. Chapter 1. Dust, Flies, and Sacred Ash. Dust, flies, and sacred ash. That's what you'd call a guidebook to Olympia, if one ever existed. Because that's exactly what you'd notice first. Grit between your teeth, flies buzzing in your eyes, and the stench of ash mixed with the blood of sacrificed bulls. Forget everything you've seen on TV. There's no manicured lawn here, no air-conditioned grandstands, no athletes in branded kits marching to national anthems. You've arrived in the Altus, not a city, not a park, but a living altar walled off in the valley of the Alpheus River. You didn't buy a ticket. Nobody registered you. You just showed up. Because once every 4 years, the entire Greek world came to a halt, not for sport, but for Zeus. Imagine this. You walked here from Athens, 7 days, from Sicily, a month, from Egypt, 6 months, and now you're here. You sleep on the ground.
Next to you, a philosopher from Miletus, a merchant from Alexandria, a prostitute, a fortune-teller, a wandering acrobat. All of Greece, not as a nation, but as a crowd. In the morning, you eat what you brought, dried fish, barley cakes. You drink straight from the river, no filters. Within 2 days, you've got dysentery. But you don't leave, because this is a pilgrimage, like the Hajj, like the Camino de Santiago. The journey itself is part of the ritual. By day, you head to the stadium, not for records, but for the spectacle. An athlete, slicked in oil, hurls a discus. Another leaps from a standing start, gripping lead weights called halteres. A third snaps his opponent's fingers in pankration. A fourth collapses after the dolikos, carried off like a corpse. This isn't entertainment. It's a trial for those who compete and for those who watch. Because here, there's no second place, only victory or failure. The winner receives a crown of wild olive, cut with a sacred knife from a tree said to have been planted by Heracles himself. The one who fails?
He goes home, without glory, without a statue, without a pension. But even he knows this. He was in Olympia. You watch as a procession passes by, priests in white chitons, flute girls playing double auloi, athletes, lean, sun-browned, hair tied in knots. A herald bellows their names. Theodoros of Corinth, son of Lycaeus. Demetrios of Rhodes, son of Cleon. Each must declare his city, his father's name, and his event. This isn't registration, it's an oath. An oath that he's a free-born Greek, that he's trained for 10 months, that he's taken no bribes, committed no murder, and defiled no sanctuaries. If anyone in the crowd knows it's a lie, they can object right then and there, and an investigation begins. Sometimes it ends in public humiliation, sometimes in a fine, and sometimes in a statue of shame. Yes, you heard that right. Along the path to the stadium stand bronze statues of Zeus, called Zanes. They're not decorations, they're warnings. Each one was paid for with fines collected from rule breakers. An athlete who bribed a judge, a trainer who entered an unprepared competitor, even an entire city that sent a slave disguised as a citizen. On the pedestal, his name, forever. Here stands the shame of the one who deceived the gods. You keep walking, past the temple of Zeus. Inside lies a 12-meter-tall statue of gold and ivory, one of the 7 wonders. But you can't enter. Only the chosen few may step inside. Everyone else admires it from afar, or prays at its base. And at night, you sleep between the columns of the temple of Hera, or right on the grass. Your neighbor, the philosopher from Miletus. Behind him, the merchant from Alexandria. Beside you, the prostitute, the fortune-teller, the wandering acrobat. All of Greece is here, not as a nation, but as a crowd. You eat what you brought, dried fish, barley cakes, a bit of cheese. You drink from the river, no filters. In 2 days, you've got dysentery again, but you don't leave. Because this is a pilgrimage, like the Hajj, like the Camino de Santiago. The road is part of the rite, and in the morning, you return to the stadium, not for records, but for the sight. A fourth collapses after the Dolikos marathon and is carried away like a dead man. This isn't a show, it's a test, for those who fight and for those who witness. Because here, there's no silver medal, only victory or failure. The victor gets a wild olive wreath, cut by a sacred blade from the tree Heracles himself supposedly planted. The loser returns home, nameless, statueless, pensionless. Yet even he knows. He stood in Olympia. He stood before the altar where the ash mound isn't earth, but the remains of hundreds of bulls burned over centuries. He watched as the barefoot priest climbed that cone, the only one permitted to do so. He heard the flute accompany the long jump, not for beauty, but to the rhythm granted by Apollo. And he understood. This isn't competition. It's prayer through the body. So next time you see the Olympic flame, don't think of medals. Think of how Olympia smelled. Think of people sleeping in mud. Think of them walking for weeks, just to witness a human being become more than himself. Because it was in that mud, that dust, and that faith that an idea was born. An idea that outlived empires. And it's still alive today. But how did someone become one of those who stepped onto that field, who dared raise their hand and say, "I want to compete"? Because, friends, not everyone could afford to lose. Chapter 2. The Body as Sacrifice. The body as sacrifice. That's what you could call the life of anyone who ever dared say, "I want to compete in the Olympic Games." Because that decision didn't open a path to glory. It began with surrender. Total, absolute. Your body no longer belonged to you. It became a tool, an offering, a prayer, and possibly a disappointment. Imagine this. You're 6 years old, the son of a farmer from Arcadia. You have no wealth, no connections. But one day, at a local festival, you lift a bronze statue and carry it off the square. Instead of punishing you for sacrilege, the elders send you to a wrestling school. That's your first step, and also your sentence. From that moment on, your life follows the rhythm of training. You eat what you're told, sleep where you're assigned, train through heat and cold. Wine? Forbidden. Sweets? Off limits. Even too much water is denied. You learn to endure pain, not as a test, but as your new normal. But the real ordeal begins 30 days before the Games. All competitors must gather in the city of Elis, the world's first Olympic village. There, you're cut off from the outside world, from your family, from your usual coaches. Now you train under a system infamous across Hellas for its brutality. This isn't preparation, it's a culling. 10 judges, also instructors, also enforcers, watch your every move. They wear long robes and carry sticks. Those sticks aren't symbolic, they're tools. A lash across the back for an inaccurate throw, a crack on the buttocks for a clumsy turn. The sound of those blows is the constant soundtrack of the training grounds. You learn to stay silent, fast. To protest means disqualification. And you didn't come all this way just to leave. Meals are strictly scheduled. Barley cakes, plain bread, a bit of red meat, feta cheese. Honey is a rare luxury. Wine isn't banned, but it's frowned upon. This isn't a diet, it's purification. Your body must be as clean as an altar. And then there's sexual discipline. No one talks about it openly, but everyone knows. Abstinence is believed to boost strength. Is it true? Maybe, but belief matters more. In a world where victory depends on divine favor, faith is the ultimate performance enhancer. You live among the best. Men who've already won in other cities, earned cash, statues, honor. Some arrived with servants, masseurs, whole entourages. Others came in a single tunic, a loaf of bread in their sack. But here, everyone is equal. Because here, it's not wealth that decides, it's endurance. It's especially brutal for those who traveled far. Imagine, you're from Egypt. You sailed for months, crossed deserts, mountains, foreign lands, and now you're in Elis, exhausted, sick, and they make you run under the blazing sun until you collapse. Fall down, you're out. Keep going, you earn a chance. But even if you survive, that's not the end. 2 days before the games, all who remain are gathered before the judges. A solemn proclamation rings out. If you have trained honorably, without laziness or shame, go to Olympia with courage. Those who have not trained properly may go wherever they please. And then the sacred march begins. 64 kilometers on foot, under a scorching sun, as part of a procession. Ahead, officials in purple robes. Behind them, athletes in white tunics. Then chariots, racehorses, sacrificial animals. Along the roadside, spectators who arrived early just to catch a glimpse of their heroes. This isn't a journey, it's the final trial. Fatigue, thirst, dust, all of it tests whether you're worthy to set foot on the sacred ground of the Altis. And when, at last, the valley of the Alpheus opens before you, when you see the marble columns of Zeus's temple, the bronze statues, the sanctuary roofs glowing in the sunset, you understand. You didn't come for the crown. You came for the right to be here. But what awaits you inside? Not triumph, not fame, but a ritual in which your body is only one small part of something greater. Because in Olympia, it's not the man who wins, it's the god. And that raises a question that haunted even the greatest. What if the god turns away? Chapter 3. The Games That Weren't About Sport. If you'd asked an ancient Greek, what's the most important part of the Olympic Games? He wouldn't have said running. He wouldn't have said wrestling. He would have answered sacrifice. Because the games were never about sport. They were about connection between human and God, between city and sky, between war and truce. The third day of the games was the holiest. That's when they sacrificed 100 white bulls. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was a national ritual, second in importance only to the oracles at Delphi. From early morning, the crowd gathers in the sacred grove. Many are still recovering from 2 days of feasting, dust, and sleeplessness. But no one dares miss this. Because here, right now, it's decided. Is Zeus favoring the Greeks this year? The procession sets out from the Bouleuterion, the council house where they divided the meat the night before. 100 bulls bellow, refusing to fall into line. Herders prod them with sticks. Judges in ceremonial robes try not to stain their sandals. The scent of burning incense barely masks the stink of fear and sweat. And towering over it all, the 12-meter statue of Zeus, made of gold and ivory. It doesn't just watch, it accepts. The high priest leads the first bull to the altar. Attendants wash their hands in sacred water. They sprinkle the animal's head, cut a lock of its hair, and toss it into the fire. The priest recites a prayer. Then barley is scattered onto the altar. Only then, the blow. Blood runs down the stones, soaks into the earth. Flies swarm in black clouds. Heat, mud, exhausted people. To a modern eye, it might look like a nightmare, but to a Greek, it was harmony, order, a world where everyone knew their place, God above, human in the middle, animal below. After sunset, the public feast begins. Carcasses are butchered near the Bouleuterion. Meat is cut into portions, no preference given. One person gets a gristly bone, another a kidney, someone else a juicy cut. No one chooses, because the distribution itself is a symbol of equality. For one evening, all stand equal before the god. But don't imagine Olympia was an island of peace in a sea of conflict. Greece wasn't a single country. It was hundreds of city-states constantly at war with each other. Athens versus Sparta, Corinth versus Argos, Thebes against everyone. And yet, once every 4 years, they declared the Ekacheria, the sacred truce. Though, truth be told, that truce only applied on the road to Olympia. On the way back, everyone fended for themselves, and often returned with fresh grievances. Because even here, at Zeus's altar, politics didn't vanish. It just changed shape. In 424 BCE, Sparta broke the truce by invading foreign territory. As punishment, its athletes were banned from competing. One Spartan still tried to sneak in, pretending to be from Boeotia. He was caught and publicly whipped. A few years later, Sparta violated the truce again, this time by sending an army. The judges fined the city 1 mina of silver per citizen. By today's standards, that's the equivalent of $5 million. And in 388 BCE, the orator Lysias came to Olympia and delivered a fiery speech against Dionysius, the tyrant of Syracuse. Enraged by his words, the crowd tore down the tyrant's tent, right in front of him. Olympia was an arena of influence. Treaties were struck here, victories announced, power displayed. When Alexander the Great conquered Persia, they proclaimed in Olympia, "Alexander is the son of Zeus." When Rome seized Greece, they installed trophies from sacked cities inside the temple of Zeus. When Emperor Augustus rose to power, he placed his own statue in the temple of Rhea, depicted as the thunder wielder himself. Even women found a loophole in this male-dominated system. They were barred from competing, but not from owning chariots. So Caniska, a Spartan princess, became the first female Olympic champion, not because she ran, but because she paid for the horses. Her statue still stands in Olympia. On its base, the inscription reads, "I, Caniska, daughter of King Archidamus, am victorious, and may this serve as an example to the Greeks." But the quietest heroines are those we know almost nothing about. The women who competed in the Heraean Games, the female contests held in honor of Hera. They ran in short chitons, right breast exposed, a symbol of transitional age. Their names were recorded in the temple, but history didn't preserve them, because Greece was a man's world, and only men wrote the chronicles. So yes, the Olympic Games were a meeting place, but not a place of reconciliation. They didn't stop wars. They postponed them, like a loan from a bank. You'll still have to pay, but you can get an extension. And yet, in rare moments, when enemies stood side by side at the altar, heard the same starting gong, watched the same victor collapse from exhaustion, in those instants, an illusion of unity was born. And sometimes, it was more than an illusion. In 476 BCE, after defeating Persia, the Greeks gathered in Olympia. It was a rare moment when they truly felt like one people. For a time, they removed trophies from their civil wars, sang the same hymns, prayed to the same god. That moment didn't last. Half a century later, the Peloponnesian War erupted, one of the bloodiest conflicts in Hellenic history. But the dream of unity remained. It became the foundation of what we now call the Olympic spirit. Which raises a question. Can a ritual survive if the faith that feeds it disappears? Because that's exactly what happened when new gods arrived. Gods who didn't accept sacrifices. Gods who demanded silence, not hymns. Gods who saw in Olympia not a sanctuary, but pagan debauchery. And so the games didn't just end, they were erased from the face of the earth. Chapter 4. From Wreath to Metal. Imagine this. You're standing where 1,000 years ago hymns were sung to Zeus, where priests climbed the ash-covered altar, where athletes hurled discs and broke fingers in pancration. But now, silence. Only the wind rustles through olive branches and marshland. Because the Alpheus River changed course, so much silt piled up that even the temple foundations sank beneath the earth. This isn't metaphor. This was Olympia by the 6th century CE. The games didn't just stop. They were erased from memory. Not because they grew boring, not because crowds drifted away, but because the world stopped believing in the gods they served. It all began in 392 CE. Emperor Theodosius I, a fervent Christian, issued an edict. All pagan cults are forbidden. The Olympic Games, as a ritual honoring Zeus, with sacrifices, processions, and festivals, became a political threat. They reminded people of a world the new empire wanted to obliterate. But the decree was only the beginning. In 426 CE, his grandson, Theodosius II, went further. He ordered the temples destroyed. The statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders, was either burned in Constantinople or melted down for its metal. The temple of Hera was reduced to rubble. The ash altar was scattered. The sacred grove was cut down. Then nature stepped in. Earthquakes, floods, landslides. By the end of the 6th century, the valley of the Alpheus had become pasture land for goats. No one knew that beneath their hooves lay the grave of antiquity's greatest cultural ritual. So Olympia vanished, not with a quiet sigh, but with hammer and torch. Centuries passed. Europe plunged into the Middle Ages. The Greek language faded. Myths turned into fairy tales. And the Olympic Games became legend, almost myth, like Atlantis, like El Dorado. But legends don't die. They wait. They wait for someone who believes. And in the 19th century, such a man appeared. His name was Richard Chandler, an English archaeologist. In 1766, he traveled to Greece. He'd read Pausanias, the ancient travel writer who described Olympia in the 2nd century CE, and he searched. For months, he wandered through swamps, questioned shepherds, dug into the soil. He found fragments of columns, shards of statues, stone inscriptions. He realized, this is it, Olympia. But the world wasn't ready. Europe was consumed by wars, revolutions, empires. The idea of reviving the games seemed like romantic folly. Until Pierre de Coubertin arrived, a young French aristocrat, historian, educator. He saw a Europe torn apart by nationalism, teetering on the brink of another war, and he asked himself, how can we unite the world's youth, not through weapons, but through movement? He traveled to Greece, stood among the ruins of Olympia, and heard not the wind, but an echo. The echo of footsteps, shouts, the starting gong. He later wrote, I felt the past speaking to me. In 1894, he convened a congress in Paris. There, among scholars and diplomats, he delivered a speech that would change history. Let us bring back the games, not as antique relics, but as an idea, the idea of peace through sport. Many laughed, some called him a dreamer, but he persisted, and in 1896, the first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens. But this was no longer Olympia. It was a new ritual. No sacrifices, no naked athletes, no statues of shame. Instead of an olive wreath, a silver medal, gold wouldn't appear until 1904. Instead of an altar, a stadium. Instead of priests, IOC officials. And yet, the spirit remained. When Spyridon Louis, a humble water carrier from the village of Marathon, won the marathon, the crowd went wild. The Prince of Greece ran alongside him for the final meters. The king offered him anything he desired. Louis asked for lifetime free shaves and a new pair of trousers. This wasn't a story about glory. It was a story about possibility, about how even an ordinary man could become a hero if he kept running. But already, cracks were forming between dream and reality. In 1900, the Games were tacked onto the World's Fair in Paris. Many athletes didn't even know they were competing in the Olympics. No medals were awarded, just trophies, books, even cigars. Women were allowed to compete, but only in golf and tennis, and even then, with heavy restrictions. In 1904, in St. Louis, organizers staged an Anthropology Day, parading indigenous peoples as primitive savages, forcing them to race in loincloths. This wasn't sport, it was racism disguised as science. Coubertin stayed silent, because he knew, for the Games to survive, compromises had to be made. But the cost of those compromises would keep rising. Still, the idea lived on, because the world craved symbols of unity, even imperfect ones. And here lies the paradox. The ancient games died when faith in the gods disappeared. The modern games were born when people stopped believing in each other and desperately sought a way to believe again. But could this new faith withstand the trials of the 20th century? A century that would bring not only technology and records, but also war, racism, and terror? Because it was then that the Olympic Games would face their hardest question. Can you keep the light alive when the whole world is sinking into darkness? Chapter 5. Fire in the Age of Darkness. You're standing at the Olympic Stadium in Berlin, August 1936. Above you, swastika banners. Around you, 110,000 spectators raising their arms in the Nazi salute. And down the track runs Jesse Owens, a black American, son of an Alabama laborer. He wasn't supposed to be here. According to Hitler's logic, he belonged to an inferior race. But he runs, and wins, 4 times. Hitler leaves before the medal ceremony. He can't bear to watch his theory of racial supremacy crumble under the crowd's applause. But here's the most terrifying part. It's not that a dictator used the games for propaganda. It's that the world let him. Because the IOC, despite calls to boycott Berlin, voted, "The games must go on." They believed sport was above politics, but politics was already in the stands. It sat in the Führer's box. It breathed down every athlete's neck. And yet, even in this nightmare, a moment of light was born. When German long jumper Louis Long approached Owens after qualifying and said, "You can jump farther, just take off a little earlier." Owens took the advice, made the final, won, and then he embraced Long in front of the entire world. It wasn't recorded in any official report, but history remembered it. The 20th century wasn't about to give the games a break. In 1968, in Mexico City, 2 Americans, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, step onto the podium after the 200-meter final.
They wear black gloves, barefoot, beads around their necks for slain civil rights activists. As the anthem plays, they raise clenched fists, the symbol of black power, of resistance. The crowd boos. The press brands them traitors. They're expelled from the delegation. Back home, they face threats, job loss, exile. But decades later, statues of them stand at the entrance of their university because they did what the games rarely allow. They turned a medal into a manifesto. Then came Munich, 1972.
You wake up at 5 a.m., outside, cool September air. You're an Israeli wrestler, today's training day. But instead, you see armed men in black storming the next building. 8 terrorists from Black September take 11 Israeli athletes hostage. They demand the release of prisoners. The IOC convenes and decides the games must continue. That evening, a minute of silence, then field hockey. Crowds cheer. Life goes on. But 11 people are already dead. And a question echoes ever since. When people are being killed, can you keep running? Or maybe that's exactly when you must run, to prove life is stronger than death. After Munich, the games changed. Security became paramount. Olympic villages turned into fortified camps. But politics didn't retreat, it just changed shape. In 1080, the US and 65 nations boycotted Moscow in protest of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. In 1984, the USSR and its allies boycotted Los Angeles in retaliation for the Moscow boycott. The Games, meant to unite, became a mirror of the Cold War. Every medal, a shot fired. Every record, an ideological victory. Yet even in that standoff, moments of hope emerged. In 1988, South Korea, still under dictatorship, hosted the Games. Streets were under tight control, but the people demanded freedom. Under protest pressure, the government conceded. It revised the constitution, held elections. The Olympics became a catalyst for democracy. In 1992, after the Berlin Wall fell, a unified team of former Soviet republics marched into Barcelona's stadium. Germans under one flag. South Africa with a fully integrated delegation for the first time since apartheid. It seemed the era of boycotts was over. But old wounds don't heal easily. In 1996, during the opening ceremony in Atlanta, a bomb explodes. A terrorist kills 2. Fear returns. And again, the games go on. In 2004, when the Olympics returned to Athens, the city spends so much it worsens its debt crisis. Sport becomes a victim of its own grandeur. In 2021, in Tokyo, the pandemic strips the games of their soul. The spectators. No applause. No energy from the stands. Just athletes running into emptiness. And yet, they run. Because perhaps, precisely when the world is falling apart, it matters most to prove you can still push beyond your limits. But the greatest challenge of the 20th and 21st centuries isn't terror, war, or pandemics. It's commerce. When Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Samsung become co-owners of the games, when a medal becomes a marketing asset, when the athlete is no longer a competitor, but a brand. And then comes another question. Can you preserve the sacred in a world where everything is for sale? The ancient Greeks would be horrified to learn the olive wreath was replaced by gold, and Zeus's altar by a billboard. But maybe they'd understand. Because even in their world, the games weren't only about gods. They were about people, their glory, their fear, their hope. And that hope, the one thing that can't be monetized, because it's free, like air, like fire. Now imagine this. You're standing on the banks of the Seine in 2024. Above you, a drone light show. Around you, millions of eyes. And suddenly, silence. Because somewhere in the world, guns are firing again. What will you do? Stop or run? Because in that choice lies the entire meaning of the Olympic Games. Chapter 6, Paris, 2024. The river instead of the stadium. You're standing on the Pont Alexandre III. Below you, the Seine. But today, it's not just a river. It's an Olympic course. Swimmers glide with its current. Above them, drones form symbols of peace in the sky. And along the banks, millions march, just as people once walked through ancient Hellas toward the sanctuary of Zeus. This is Paris, 2024. The city where the International Olympic Committee was born. The city where Pierre de Coubertin first said, "The important thing is not to win, but to take part." And now, 128 years later, the Games are returning to their spiritual home. But these aren't the Games of the 19th century, not even those of the 20th. This is an Olympics for a new era, open, vulnerable, yet resolutely forward-looking. For the first time in history, full gender parity. Exactly as many women as men, no restrictions, no more women can't. Because the world has finally understood, talent has no gender. For the first time, breakdancing is an Olympic sport. Not in elite halls, but on the streets, where movement is born, where teenagers turn asphalt into stages. This is recognition. Culture is sport too, and culture is also resistance. And the opening ceremony? It's not in a stadium, it's on the river. Boats carrying national delegations float down the Seine like a procession of ancient heralds. It's a risk, a challenge, because weather, water, security, none of it is fully controllable. But that's precisely the spirit of the modern Olympics. Not perfect isolation, but immersion, in the city, in life, in reality. Yes, reality is complicated.
Russian and Belarusian athletes are here, but without flags, without anthems, without marching in the parade. Only if they personally declare, "I do not support the war." This isn't punishment. It's the price of belonging to a community that chooses peace. And yet, they can still run, swim, jump, because the IOC, despite everything, still believes an athlete is not a soldier, even if their country is at war. But what makes Paris special? Not technology, not budget. Memory. Paris remembers Berlin, 1936, where racism tried to humiliate Jesse Owens and lost. Paris remembers Mexico City, 1968, where raised fists became a symbol of dignity. Paris remembers Munich, 1972, where terror tried to kill hope and failed. And now it tells the world, we won't hide, we won't be afraid, we'll come together, even as the world falls apart. Because the Olympic Games no longer pretend politics doesn't exist. They confront it through participation, through a Ukrainian standing beside a Japanese athlete, through an Afghan sportswoman racing under the same flag as a Brazilian champion. And yes, among them will be the refugee team. People without passports, but with dreams. They don't represent a nation. They represent humanity. And the marathon? It will once again become an act of reconciliation. The route winds past the Pantheon, the Louvre, Notre Dame,
rebuilt after the fire. Every turn is a reminder. We've survived destruction. We can rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, one of the runners will pause for a moment at the bridge where Parisians welcomed their liberators in 1944 and think, we're free again. Maybe only for a while, but free. Yet the most important question Paris 2024 asks isn't technical or logistical. It's ethical. Can sport remain honest in a world where everything is for sale? Because today's Olympics are billions of dollars, sponsors, broadcast rights, brands, Instagram stars in leotards.
And yet, deep beneath it all, that same spark remains. The one that drove Coroebus to run 192 meters for a wild olive wreath. That's the spark Paris is trying to protect. It refuses to build new stadiums. Instead, it uses existing ones, from Roland Garros to Stade de France. It makes the games urban, not enclosed, open to everyone, not just ticket holders, but passers-by, to children who'll see diving not on TV, but live, right on the banks of the Seine. This is an attempt to give the Olympics back to the people. And yet, the shadows of the past don't vanish. The Seine's water quality is still in doubt. Organizers promise it'll be clean by games time. But trust has been broken. The budget keeps growing. Protests echo through the streets. And beyond Paris, wars rage, climate disasters unfold, inequality deepens. So, should the games even happen? Many say, no, it's wasteful. Others reply, exactly why, yes. Because if we canceled the Olympics, we admit the world is too broken for hope. But as long as there's one runner willing to race in the rain, as long as there's one gymnast training in a basement with no electricity, as long as there's one swimmer who crossed a sea seeking refuge, the Olympics are needed. Not as perfection, but as a reminder, we can be better. And now, the final image. You're watching the screen. On it, a torchbearer sprints down the Champs-Élysées. Behind him, the flame lit in Olympia. Ahead, the Arc de Triomphe. But he doesn't stop. He keeps running. Because the flame isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning. The beginning of dialogue. The beginning of rivalry without hatred. The beginning of peace, even if only for 16 days. And suddenly, you understand. The Olympic Games were never really about sport. They've always been about one thing, a human being's choice to reach for light, even in the deepest darkness. And now, the question is yours. When you see that flame above the Seine, what will you choose? Will you watch or become part of it? Because, friends, the Olympics aren't what happens in a stadium. They're what happens inside us. And if you've ever lain on the ground with sand in your teeth, pain in your muscles, and one thought in your head, I have to get up, then you've already been to Olympia. Because Olympia isn't a place. Olympia is a state of mind.